Welcome to the fourth episode of TelecomTV's new programme, the Openrun Show, which each month takes a focused look at a particular part of the Openrun sector as we talk to some of the main people driving the development and deployment of disaggregated multi-vendor radio access networks. I'm Ray Lemaitre, Editorial Director at TelecomTV, and I'm your host for this programme, which this month takes a look at one of the most critical areas for the Openrun community right now, and that's testing. Now, of course, testing is an absolutely critical part of all areas of the communications networking and services sector, but in Openrun there's now a real sense of urgency to further expand and enhance all phases of the testing life cycle so that useful, verified technology elements and combinations of Openrun-enabled systems can be made available to network operators in a way that will help to accelerate the route to commercial deployments. And that's important because the Openrun sector is still lacking the scale needed for financial and operational viability. And without that, its supporters will likely be left in something of a wireless infrastructure cul-de-sac pretty soon. Now, I should make it very clear that lots of Openrun tests, trials, proofs of concept have already taken place during the past 3+ years, and there are plenty of well-established and trusted test and measurement technology companies such as Keysight, Viavi, Anritsu, Spirent, and Rohde & Schwarzer developing and delivering Openrun test systems to the sector. So where are we right now in terms of Openrun testing? Well, to find out more, I'm delighted to have as my special guest Carsten Rossenhövel, Managing Director at the European Advanced Networking Test Center, or EANTC, in Berlin, who will be our expert commentator throughout the program today. Carsten, thanks very much for joining us on the Openrun show once again. Where are we with Openrun, and at what step of the testing cycle are we in? Is it all about unilateral interoperability right now, or multi-vendor, any functionality or product conformance testing needed?
Well, as we have all seen at Mobile World Congress this year in Barcelona 2 months ago, there is a tremendous effort going on. There are lots of products mushrooming, being announced, being released. A lot of products are already in the second or third year. So you can bet that there is a ton of testing going on. Of course, much of the testing happens at the vendor sites, early integration and product testing, but also there is a huge activity at the O-RAN Alliance, which we'll get to a little bit later. And so I think for now, the testing is not fully multi-vendor like any-to-any as we know it in other technologies, such as, SDN, for example, where vendors just flood into the room and then they're happy to test with everybody. It's more like partnerships based. It's more like a DU-CU vendor designates a few radio units they want to test with. That's the case on the service provider side. And in 5G campus, it's even closer. Often vendors devise partnerships individually, like we want to work with these two radio unit vendors and nobody else. In the service provider side, it will depend on how the operators will steer the market. But in general, I think there is some good progress this year. The Plugfests are really thriving. There are tons of vendors are participating there. And the innovation in the optimization space, the RICs, the radio integrated controllers, is particularly visual this year, although it's a pretty early stage yet. So everybody is doing functional testing. The end-to-end scenario testing continues. We also continue to do that at our joint lab with operators in Germany, the I14y Lab. And this end-to-end testing is cumbersome and difficult because the troubleshooting always involves multiple parties.
Okay, thanks, Carsten. So lots going on and progress being made, but still a great deal to do, especially in terms of those end-to-end multi-vendor tests. The community knows that too, of course, which is why industry bodies such as the O-RAN Alliance are ramping up and enhancing their test activities. Alex Choi, chairman of the O-RAN Alliance and SVP of Group Technology at Deutsche Telekom, talked to me about this at MWC in Barcelona earlier this year.
Our focus is more on how we can better support our member company So to make their interoperability test, end-to-end test easier. And so we are providing, for example, OTIC, Open Testing and Integration Lab. Today we already have 11 OTICs globally, and we're going to use this lab, and as we will let this lab to be used by the member companies, especially the vendor and also service provider, to expedite such kind of a process. And we will make sure we are bringing all these necessary testing cases, not just the specification, but the testing cases. And also in Orange Alliance, we have a very good testing and integration solution players, like you have VRB, Rohde & Schwarz, and Keysight. They're all active member of Orange Alliance.
So a greater focus there from the ORAN Alliance on helping companies with their test plans and needs. But does the technology exist to help in these processes? Well, let's find out from our special guest, Carsten from EANTC. So, Carsten, to what extent do commercial Open RAN testing tools already exist? Or are network operators and companies such as EANTC or systems integrators indeed having to develop some in-house test code themselves?
There are actually quite a few choices for commercial test tools, and new ones were released at Mobile World Congress this year. So the vendors that we are working with are Keysight and VIAVI for end-to-end emulators, like the really complex stuff. There's also Anritsu and Spirent in this area, and of course there might be more. I may not have the full overview. There are many more vendors on the 3GPP radio side of testing, such as Rohde & Schwarz, for example, and also specialist test companies for OCloud, for example, Vorare we've worked with, or for clock synchronization, Calnex. So there is a good choice of vendors. The only problem is, of course, many of these tools are very complex and quite expensive. So a number of service providers we're working with are actually favoring the so-called real UE testing, just using smartphones in shielded boxes. And although the testing capabilities are much more manual in that case and limited, because obviously it's not easy to build out 100 UEs in the lab, it's more useful to use an emulator for that kind of testing. But they are also cheaper and probably, I guess, and also they are more the realistic deployment case. Because one of the problems in testing is always, if I test something and I go back to the vendor and say, your product is failing, then they will first say, your test environment was wrong and your test plan was wrong. So I can counter that by saying I'm using a standardized test plan, for example, from ORAN Alliance, and I'm using the same end systems, the same UEs, user equipment, as in the real production network. So that's the situation we're in. And in-house development is needed for multi-vendor test orchestration. So at EANTC, we have created a multi-vendor test orchestrator that can interface with all of the different names that I mentioned. And because that's not normally the case, so the orchestrators coming from the test tool vendors are focusing on their own tools. And also in-house test development is needed for complex digital twins, such as in advanced radio optimization testing.
Okay, interesting that there's additional development work needed there. And Carsten, who is doing Open RAN testing and using what format exactly? Is it all about Plugfests and individual operator lab initiatives, or are there ongoing year-round tests and initiatives? And is it possible to conduct remote testing these days?
There are two main public activities. One is the ORAN Alliance Plugfest series. I think they're now in the 4th year. We have at EANTC and I14y Lab already conducted quite a few, and we're currently staging the next one. It's called the Spring 2023 Global Plugfest. And these are really event-based, so they have a fixed test duration, and then people go home again, and then they come back a few months later. I think that's actually fairly good, because most vendors cannot sustain the continuous testing effort in all of the labs out there. We have to imagine there are the Plugfests, there are service provider proof of concept tests, there are in-house tests, there are partnership tests. So pretty much all resources are stretched these days, and event-based Plugfests are probably the most useful ones. Of course, at I14y Lab, we're also striving to go to a more continuous model because we believe the innovation advances will be faster and more steady. And so in that area, there are these telecom infra project or TIP projects. And these TIP projects are focusing more on specific use case scenarios that are closer to production developed deployments, as realistic as possible. And they're really aiming to close the gap. And the TIP guys are mostly active in 3 areas. One is end-to-end testing from ORU to ODU to OCU. And the second one is the RAN intelligence and automation, the RIA group, which does network RIC testing. And the third one is orchestration and management automation. So these are all developing. And I know in the Orion Alliance, there are quite a number of discussions going on how to evolve the Plugfests, how to make them more impactful every time, to avoid that vendors are reproducing the same kind of demonstrations at various places worldwide and at various times, to really work with the vendors to get some incremental innovation every time.
Right, yes, that makes a lot of sense, especially given the urgency needed to make things as efficient and streamlined as possible. And that's a view shared by Andreas Gladisch, who, as well as being VP of Emerging Technologies at Deutsche Telekom's Group Technology Function, is also consortium lead of the I14y Lab in Berlin, which is run by a group of companies, including Germany's 3 major network operators and various partners, to bring in and involve all manner of companies in Open RAN testing. And he sees lots of benefits from the Plugfests, but also told TelecomTV when I asked him about the main learnings so far from the I14y Lab collaborators that more needs to be done.
The project started almost 2 years ago, and we started with initiatives dealing with the Plugfests and setting up all those Plugfests. And one learning is these Plugfests are great, for sure, and it helps the industry that the different partners come together. On the other hand, this event-driven solution and this event-driven approach is just the first step. So we really want to bring it forward to kind of regular testing, so that we means the operators agree on reference configurations and scenarios that are most important for the operators, that we implement these scenarios as regular test setup, so that we easily can change components and test components. So that is a learning. Make it more relevant for the industry and step out of the event-driven Plugfests. On the other hand, those Plugfests are important, don't get me wrong, but we need to come closer to products here.
And one of the hopes of I14y is that more new companies will get involved in Open RAN and develop apps and systems that can be used in open, disaggregated radio access networks. And that's also one of the hopes of the UK's digital Catapult, which in partnership with regulator Ofcom and the government's Department for Science, Innovation and Technology, or DSIT, has set up Sonic Labs, which offers testing facilities to Open RAN hopefuls in the UK. Here's what Paul Seeley, Director of Technology Strategy at Digital Catapult, had to say.
So Smart Open RAN Network Interoperability Centre. So this is a piece of work that we put together, and the gestation came through discussions with DSIT, the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology, and also Ofcom, the regulator in the UK. So all 3 of us were looking at Open RAN and seeing the opportunities for different reasons. So we're looking at it from an innovation perspective, and DSIT looking at it from a diversification of the telecoms ecosystem supply in the UK, and Ofcom looking at it from their perspective of it being something that's happening that they really need to understand. And we were looking at this and thinking that for it to evolve, we really need to understand what it's doing. But also from an innovation perspective, you need to help these products to all work together. If you've got new vendors coming in, then the problem is interoperability between them. And then the problem is to get interoperability, you need to test it. And we want to provide a neutral environment point where all of those organizations can work together, and so that we can foster this sense of collaboration and help the whole technology ecosystem in the UK. So from our perspective in the UK, so that you can get different products from different vendors to all work together in a working end-to-end system. And our thesis is that you need to do more testing, you need to do more interoperability testing to get this to a point where then end customers can work with it. So we're trying to sit between. So we want to work with working products. So someone's got a Openrun product, it works, it does what it's supposed to do. And we want to get that to a working end-to-end system with other vendors that then can go off to a potential user, an end user, who can then do the really deep, in-depth testing that they would need to do and the integration into their internal systems. And so we can focus on that kind of like breadth across that, working with lots and lots of different vendors as far as possible.
But it's not just about neutral labs where anyone can go and test their functionality and interoperability, of course. The network operators have their own labs, and so do vendors. Indeed, in the UK, Rakuten Symphony recently opened its Openrun Customer Experience Centre in Weybridge. And while the main focus is on validation of its own technology alongside that of existing partners, Symphony is also looking to get the UK's academic community involved, and also to be able to prove certain points or debunk certain claims using its lab facility, as Ravi Dabusi, Chief Business Officer at Rakuten Symphony, explained to us during the launch of the centre.
Look, there's different areas. In every domain, there's at least some form of validation and testing that needs to take place. We prefer that to be quite efficient. And that's another reason why we built this lab here. So instead of replicating those kind of ORAN deployments and environments in a POC or a trial, we can always validate here. And this accelerates the time to market and reduces the cost of such validation. But additionally, I think there are a lot of areas that are quite misunderstood because of the nascency of the technology. Security is one of them. And there's a lot of truth of the potential vulnerabilities and the areas of concerns that exist today, just like with any digital system. But there's a lot of FUD. So this lab will demystify the good from the bad and the FUD from reality. And it'll also help us really proof the resiliency of ORAN, the resiliency of the virtualization and the cloud layer that ORAN runs on. Because to be honest with you, currently, cloud has been used in almost every industry and every domain, including telecom. But having it now in RAN, where the big spend is, and typically that spend goes to a handful of suppliers, it raises a question mark. But regulators, policymakers, security experts, and the standards bodies around the world have already set the right guidelines and the right guardrails for how to secure a cloud-based deployment of your radio access network. Okay. And our practical reference from our own network in Japan, whatever customer environment we are deploying right now, can also be shared as a proof point of the resiliency of the ORAN cloud-native deployment.
So ultimately, what does the ecosystem get out of these test processes? What are the tangible takeaways? Well, let's go back to Carsten from EANTC. Carsten, what are the outcomes for those involved? Are we at a stage of certification yet? And if so, how useful is this to the ecosystem?
Well, certification is always the elephant in the room. And certification is attached with a few hopes from both sides of the market. So the operators usually hope that certification will speed up their RFP process and reduce the lab time that they need to spend for individual verifications, whereas the vendors hope that a certification passed will simplify their way to get shortlisted, to get through an RFP and speed up things. However, for that to happen, the certification needs to have a certain technical level. And that's always the struggle in the industry in general, independent of ORAN, generally. But specifically in ORAN, all of the market participants, I think, are now looking to find this right level. The certification should not be too simple, because then it has no real value to the operators, but it should also not be too strict, so that only, let's say, 10% of the market can pass it right now. So the secret sauce here is to really find a certification level that's adequate, that's meaningful, and that provides an added value to all market participants. I think it's still a little bit early for that. There are two main initiatives, the Openrun Alliance and Telecom Infra Project, who are working on certification and badging. And generally speaking, the certification for very basic functionality, specifically at the ORUs, for example, can be considered ready at the Openrun Alliance. But anything beyond that, for complex multi-vendor end-to-end systems, for the network optimization, for integration of management components, is yet to be done. And also certification covering more advanced aspects of these implementations that are really key to production deployments: the scalability, the performance, the manageability, reliability of the networks, make sure they run through a couple of weeks or months without crashing, and security aspects. We're just at the very beginning.
Thanks, Carsten. So lots to think about there. And that brings us to one of our regular slots on this program, the latest Openrun news. And as ever, the main headlines are brought to you by my colleague, TelecomTV's Deputy Editor, Yanni Boyatsieva. Yanni, over to you.
Thanks, Ray. This month, UK telco giant Virgin Media O2 finally committed to a commercial Openrun rollout after years of tests and trials. The operator has selected Mavenir as its key partner for the deployment. Mavenir will act as a systems integrator, as well as primary technology supplier for Virgin Media O2's first substantial rollout of Openrun systems. The telco's Director of Technical Strategy and Architecture, Neil Geary, spoke with TelecomTV exclusively about the move, explaining that the development is largely being driven by Telefonica, which, along with Liberty Global, is the joint owner of Virgin Media O2. 5 telco giants that are driving the development of the Openrun sector in Europe have updated their tech priorities. Deutsche Telekom, Orange, Telecom Italia, Telefonica and the Vodafone Group have provided a joint update on the technical developments they want to see from the vendor community. The document focuses on their requirements about service management and orchestration and RAN Intelligent Controller, or RIC. The release also tackles challenges around energy efficiency and security. And it's not just the telcos that are uniting around the requirements for the Openrun era. A quintet of vendors have joined forces to create the so-called Multi-G initiative, which aims to develop the industry's first framework for a multi-generational, or multi-G, software-based Openrun architecture. The group consists of Cohere Technologies, Intel, Juniper Networks, Mavenir, and VMware. The vendors pledge to define frameworks, interfaces, interoperability testing, and evaluation criteria that would provide support for full coexistence of 4G, 5G, and future waveforms. The initiative has already attracted support from Vodafone Group, Telstra, and Bell Canada, all of which are already working in some capacity with Cohere Technologies. 2 significant Openrun testing developments took place in the UK during the past month. First, Rakuten Symphony opened its Openrun Customer Experience Centre in Weybridge, just southwest of London. Then UK state-funded digital Catapult opened a new facility in North London as part of its program Sonic Labs, where Sonic stands for Smart Run Open Network Interoperability Centre. Digital Catapult claims that the facility, which has been built in association with UK regulator Ofcom, offers a commercially neutral, collaborative environment for the testing and integration of Openrun network solutions. The lab is welcoming Openrun vendors to trial, test and accelerate their product developments, and is also part of efforts by the UK government strategy to diversify the supply chain in the 5G era, and to make it more secure and accessible for new entrants in the market. HQ, which is a developer of base station on a chip technology that combines 4G, 5G and AI capabilities, has raised $75 million in a new funding round. It intends to use the proceeds to move forward with its plan to provide multi-mode, 4G plus 5G convergence, along with the production-grade 4G plus 5G file layer for Openrun distributed unit and small cells. According to Vinay Ravuri, the CEO of HQ, the company aims to help ecosystem players to innovate and deploy private 5G networks and Openrun in simplistic, affordable terms. Finally, Ericsson unveiled new solutions that aim to enhance the energy efficiency of Openrun deployments, claiming its new apps can reduce the daily radio network energy consumption by up to 25%. Using artificial intelligence and machine learning, its Run Energy Control R app provides an autonomous mechanism to determine which radio power saving features per radio unit should be activated or deactivated every 15 minutes across the whole network. The solution also considers traffic impact using machine learning to ensure network performance remains unaffected. And that's this month's main Openrun news. Ray, back over to you.
Thanks very much, Yanni. Lots of really interesting developments there. So let's get some final thoughts on our special topic of the day, testing, from our special guest for this program. Carsten, as you mentioned, you've been involved in quite a lot of Openrun testing already in the past few years. Any surprises so far for you?
Generally, I think we're still at an early stage of the market. So we all need to be optimistic, and we want to be optimistic. So that's great. Of course, the real lab outcomes, when you actually walk into the lab, you pass through all of these NDA walls, and then you get to the real products. Of course, in fact, the devil is in the details, and things don't look as positive as they might look in press releases. That's not unusual, and I think everybody in the industry knows about that. It's also not a specific ORAN problem. So the real lab level outcomes are promising, but they're early. And most products, I would say, are still on the left side of the Gartner hype cycle. So that's one thing. What concerns me a little bit is that the mobile market has always been more political than the wireline market. In wireline at EANTC, we're doing tons of testing. And as I said earlier, people are just coming into the lab, they're joining, and they're happy to test with everybody. But in the mobile space, there's always, even for newcomers, not only for the established legacy vendors where you would expect this behavior, there's always this question, do we want to test with somebody? Do we want to spend the effort? Is it worth it? Do we have a real deployment case with a carrier, for example? And that's a little bit concerning, because we are now at the deciding stage whether we will see a true multi-vendor standardized market in ORAN in the future, or whether we will see some disjunct, loosely connected ecosystems of different vendors. Typically, these ecosystems, as it seems today, will start from the DU and CU side, because these are the most influential vendors and also the smallest group. And they're picking the radios, they're picking the rigs, they're picking the X apps, they're picking the SMO management solutions that they want to work with. And I'm looking to the operators to understand whether the operators are interested more in a very well-tested but disconnected market where they have to issue RFPs for like a whole bunch of solution, including everything, or whether the operators are more looking for a component-based market where they can issue an RFP, let's say for new radios, and just pick anything to work with their existing DUs and CUs, for example.
And what needs to happen next? What would you like to see in the rest of 2023 and then into 2024?
So number one is, of course, to get the certification programs ready. And at EANTC, together with our colleagues from the I14y Lab in Berlin, from the operators Deutsche Telekom, Vodafone and Telefonica, who are involved in our joint lab program in Berlin and other locations. Of course, we want to get the certifications ready. We're actively working with the ORAN Alliance and with TIP to help them speed up. And the second thing is to really distill what are the wishes and desires for the operators for end-to-end systems. One of the problems in the radio testing is that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of parameters of radios. And if we want to certify all of them, it will become very lengthy and costly. So we need the operators to tell us which combinations, which scenarios, which of the many options in the ORAN Alliance specifications do you really want to deploy. So operators need to get vocal for real multi-vendor ecosystems. And certification requirements obviously need to be aligned with these operator needs. One of my other wishes would be that vendors, if possible, could benefit from getting some sort of multi-domain knowledge. For example, if I'm working with a radio vendor, of course, they're experts much more than I am in the radio space. If I work with a DU vendor, they're experts in the 3GPP and O-RAN specifications. However, when we ask them to get containerized deployment on any kind of system, usually the headaches start because vendors, as have always been in any technologies, they're experts in their own domain, but not necessarily in adjacent domains. However, in O-RAN, the architecture is so complex that it's needed to understand not only the infrastructure level, but also the platform level, the O-cloud level, as we say, and also the application level. What are people going to do with these products in the end in terms of slicing, quality requirements, and so on? So my big wish for the vendors would be to be more open for multi-vendor testing and also to gain more cross-domain knowledge.
Great. That's actually a really important message there for the vendor community. And that brings us to the end of this episode of the Openrun show. Thanks very much to all of our guests today, in particular our special contributor, Carsten Rossenhövel from EANTC, and thanks to you for watching. Please join us again next month. But it's goodbye for now.